Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here. Welcome back to another special episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. We're in the middle of the fiction takeover. Rami and the Fictioneers have taken over the podcast for the month of November. So for NaNoWriMo. And this week we're talking about editing. So we've got another special guest. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, you can see all three of us. If not, well, you'll hear us. So we've got Shavonne here. We've got Rami here. And I'm going to pass it to Rami in just a second. But Siobhan is she has a company called Motif Edits, works with a lot of our authors and our fiction programs that Rami runs. And this week we're talking about fiction editing, like we said. So week one was about seven-figure fiction, learning from the trenches with Steve Higgs. Week two, we talked about fiction covers. Really, really insightful episode. Hopefully you guys love that. Jake, Caleb. And this week we talk about editing. So we're going to keep working through kind of the core pillars. So with that, I'll pass it to Rami, who many of you know is created all the fiction programs and is the head of fiction here at Self-Publishing School, has helped hundreds, if not thousands of authors publish books. So pass it to you, Rami. You can tee up Siobhan and let's roll.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This is the part where I embarrass Siobhan, and so I'm pre-apologizing for that one. So Siobhan, it was or is, I guess, actually, you're going to have to correct my grammar on this one, was or is my seventh editor, right? So I went through 6 other editors before I finally found the one. And I'm never leaving Siobhan. This is a relationship for life, Siobhan, because you will edit everything I do forever. And since I have 60 books out, that's a lot of books that you have edited of mine. So I'm sorry, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So
I think that would be is.
Is, okay. So she is my 7th editor. Okay. So, Siobhan, I know you and I had talked about what we wanted to do on this call, and I am going to let you name it what you actually name it. But in the school, we have something that we refer to as murder boarding. Now, if you don't have a military background and or have never heard the term, no, we are not trying to kill anyone. What it is it's constructive feedback, but we're not going to hold back. We're not holding back any punches. We're not holding back any thoughts. The goal here is to give you to the minutia, every little bit that you can improve about yourself in as constructive a way as possible so that you can be the best version of yourself. And when we do murder boarding in the school, well, I asked Siobhan, who has murder boarded so many of my books, right, if she would murder board some of the students' opening pages, because let's be honest, that first page sells the book, right? And so now Siobhan offers murder boarding as a service, or what do you actually call it now?
Murder boarding, yeah, it's become so ubiquitous now.
That's awesome. I love it.
You.
All right. Well, I know you had a presentation, so why don't you take it away?
Okay. Thanks so much for having me on. This is really exciting for me because I've been working with students from the school for years now, and I'm just very excited about both SP.com as well as helping people write the best books possible. That's always been basically the reason I got into editing. So let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can you all see this?
Yes.
I'm going to play. Okay. Is that, you're seeing that?
That looks perfect. Yep.
Oh, cool.
So basically what I'm going to be talking about today is these openers to great novels. We're going to be looking at them in 3 genres: thriller, romance, and sci-fi. And then we're going to be looking at student submissions in each of those genres and the original submission, and then how I think it might be stronger and why. So before I dive into the three genres, I think it's really crucial here to cover the four elements of what I call a killer opener, keeping with the murder board theme. And the first of them is point of view and tense. So readers, many of them who are not trained as writers or to know how to write or read like a writer, are not thinking about this consciously, but they do have subconscious expectations for getting answers to these things right away when they open a book.
Right.
So very quickly, they want to know whose head we're in, what POV, and what tense we're in. So this typically is first person or third person for POV, and then typically present tense or past tense. There's obviously more options than that, but these are the most common.
I would just like to interject on one point. I don't care who you are, never write in second person. It just doesn't work. That's it.
There you go. Okay.
That's right.
Rami has told you never write in second person. It obviously doesn't work well for selling books usually.
That's right.
And the second thing they're looking for is grounding. Where are we, right? Because when we open a book, we could be anywhere. We could be on Earth, we could be in outer space, we could be inside a whale's belly. We just don't know until the writer gives us the answer. And so we're kind of floating in this formless void. The third thing, and this is the thing that's in basically every single good opener, is raising questions in the reader's mind. You want to raise intrigue so that they can only get those questions answered, that source of intrigue answered by reading on. And so there's two types of questions you can raise, good ones and bad ones. So a good question is if in your first line someone's in a hurry, the point of intrigue is where are they going and why are they in a hurry? This is a question they can get answered by reading on, and it keeps them inside your story. Bad questions create confusion. So between the first and the second line, we might change POV entirely or change tense. And this might confuse readers. They might say, well, whose head are we in? What tense are we in? And in this way, they feel outside the story. They're not in the dream of your world. So you never want to confuse readers with questions like that. You want to keep them inside your story. This is crucial. And then lastly, this ties in with questions. Often a way of creating questions is creating tension, bringing up problems. So not all of these have to be in every great opener, or especially the first line. Like you'll see a lot of great first lines that only have one or two of these. Some have all four, but the one that you pretty much always are going to encounter is raising questions in the reader's mind. So with these four elements in mind, let's go through some great openers. We'll start with thrillers. So I picked The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. I picked great openers to books that were made into movies or TV shows. This is one of the greatest movies, in my opinion. So the opening paragraph goes, behavioral science, the FBI section that deals with serial murder, is on the bottom floor of the Academy building at Quantico, half buried in the earth. Clarice Starling reached it flushed after a fast walk from Hogan's Alley on the firing range. She had grass in her hair and grass stains on her FBI Academy windbreaker from diving to the ground under fire in an arrest problem on the range. So, thinking about those four elements, in that first line, we get a great sense of grounding. Right away, we imagine this building, the bottom floor of the Academy building at Quantico, half buried in the earth. It's a wonderful visual. And so right away, we feel this kind of sense of realism of being there on the ground in Virginia, Quantico, Virginia.
Right. And also, it also ties the serial killer, the terminology half buried.
Yes.
Right. Like, and it's funny because I know that Chandler talks a lot about in entrepreneurial spaces, right? In the nonfiction spaces about embedding, right? Like you're embedding these concepts, you're embedding what's coming. You're embedding this in fiction. Embedding is often done by language choice, where the language choice directly ties to the bigger issue or the theme, or in this case, it's the serial killer. We are dealing with multiple serial killers, half buried. Like, what do serial killers do? They bury their not evidence, what do you call it? Their victims, right? So yeah, it works really well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I wanted to touch on with regard to thrillers. And that is that thriller readers are expecting this sort of language. This gets them excited, right? In the first line, we have serial murder, we have FBI, we have half buried. It's not a coincidence or an accident that Harris included the term half buried in the earth. We can imagine not just a building, but a body.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about serial.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just that one word is so great, because it also implies at the simultaneously, like, someone who's in real trouble, right? Like someone who's about to die because you buried the dead, right? Mm-hmm. While simultaneously giving hope. And that's also a thriller expectation, is that the hero is going to save someone. We know people are going to die, but someone's going to get saved. So that's the half buried. There's the hope and the despair in just that one word, right? It's great. Yeah.
Great point. Yeah. And so you can see that language in other parts of this first paragraph too. We see under fire, arrest problem, firing range, flushed. She's in a rush as well. And so we get lots of tension in this first paragraph and questions. Why is she in such a rush? Why does she have grass all over her? And what's going to happen at the behavioral science building dealing with serial murder? And then the last thing I'd love to point out here is, one of the reasons Clarice Starling is often called one of the greatest heroines, is because she's simultaneously vulnerable and a badass. And you see that even in this first paragraph. Clarice, is a very specific woman's name, right? And we see in the movie that she's very small, right? We don't get that in this first paragraph, but we know she's wearing her FBI Academy windbreaker. She's just a trainee. She's a woman, but she's like really a badass already. She's got grass everywhere, but she doesn't even mind. She's got somewhere to be. And so you really get a wonderful little portrait of her in this first paragraph. I already am compelled by Clarice. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a student submission in this genre. So this student writes under the pen name GP Schumacher, and she writes psychological thrillers, which Silence of the Lambs is sometimes called. And this was a book that she's currently writing. And this is the very opening 2 paragraphs. It goes, "The military, are you crazy?" Rosie put down her coffee cup and stared at her friend, who sat across from her at their high school cafeteria table. "Why the heck would you want to go into the military, Hadley?" Hadley took a sip of her own coffee, then gave her friend a serious look. "Because not everyone is as genius as you are. The average person isn't guaranteed a full-ride scholarship to college, and certainly not to an Ivy League school." So she's actually doing some things well here. Right away, we have a sense of grounding. We know where we're at. And we also have these 2 characters kind of at odds a bit. They're having a conversation where, one is calling the other crazy. Why the heck would you want to do this? So there's some questions raised, some tension, that grounding. Not totally clear on POV. We do have a clear sense of tense. But I do have some suggestions for how this might be stronger. So I'm going to show you now the revisions I made. So with my revisions, this now reads, Rosie Mullins. I gave her a fake last name. I don't know if this is her last name. But Rosie Mullins lowered her soda and stared at her friend, seated across from her at their high school cafeteria. "The military. Are you crazy? Why would you want to enlist, Hadley?" Hadley sipped at her own soda. She set the empty can down with a hollow clank. Not everyone is a genius like you, Rosie. Most of us don't get a full ride to college, and certainly not to Brown. So, why did I make the changes I made here? First, I really wanted to focus more in on creating a sense of tension from the beginning. Based on The Silence of the Lambs, we get so much tension in that opener. And I wanted to amplify the disagreement between these two. And also this question of why Rosie hates the military. I wanted to draw all that out. So in order to do that, I utilized her internal thinking. And I also had Hadley set the can down with a hollow clank. I made that action do more work in terms of creating tension. And then I sort of modified Hadley's dialogue to also get at the contention between them. Second, I tightened the writing. The original had some extra words, and I think it reduced some of the power of the writing. All these great openers that you're going to see, they are tight. They do not have one extra word. And so this is such a crucial piece of advice. Always look to where you can tighten your writing. It will greatly amplify its power. Third, I didn't do this here because I didn't see really opportunities, but I suggested to this writer to incorporate suggestions of physicality or violence. In the Silence of the Lambs opener, we talked about, right, we have so many mentions of serial murder, have buried, firing range, arrest, problem. Like we have all of this suggestion of violence, right? And that's what thriller readers are reading for, is that the possibility of violence. When is it going to come, right? And so you're kind of always foreshadowing that in thrillers. Rami, do you have a thought? I see you.
Yeah, I have so much. I mean, one of the mistakes, and this is something that I'm always talking to with new writers all the time, right? I probably, I must say this like 3 times a day when I'm coaching, which is just that, it is imperative that you're setting up the expectations. And the thing is like, I don't care what you want to do with this book. If you're not meeting the genre expectations, it's not going to work. And so, for example, in thriller, the genre expectations is physical violence.
Yeah.
Right? And there is always some form of, well, I don't even want to say, because you can argue that like legal thrillers have less physical violence. There'll still be some, but there's a lot of courtroom tension and courtroom battles. But there is 2 people who are at battle with each other, and the stakes are life and death. They're not like, the stakes aren't who gets to own the cat, right? In the divorce, the stakes are life and death, right? Someone is going to either actually die or metaphorically die in a thriller. That's one thing. But then the other thing that you did, which I thought, and if I'm like stealing your mojo here, I apologize, Siobhan.
Go ahead.
The one thing that you did, or there's a lot of improvements here, but there's one thing in particular that I wanted to point out that is like I really understated genius, right? You changed it from coffee, the coffee cup, which why do I need a coffee cup, to soda. And I think the reason why this is so important is because they're in high school, and the vision that a high school student is, especially in a high school cafeteria, are drinking a coffee is jarring, especially to an older reader, right? Like, as an older reader, the idea that a coffee would be in high school was like a non-existent thing. I don't know what these young, millennials do, quite honestly. Like that's but in my day, there was no coffee in the school, all right, unless you're in the teacher's lounge. And so I think it is, that idea of like bad questions create confusion. Confusion can be created by anything, right? And simply saying a coffee cup in a high school cafeteria when, well, it seems that they're students and not teachers, right? That creates just enough confusion for someone to be like, oh my, sorry, I'm going to shut up in 1 minute, but I will raise so Shavonne and I have actually co-authored a series together. And
Two
one
series.
of the two series together, that's
Yeah.
right. And one of the do you remember the Hercules criticism for right? So
Remind me.
okay, so in the opening scene of the book that had all the right elements, Hercules, Cupid, and two other full-grown adults get into a Mustang and drive off. They're being chased by a ghost dinosaur, if you remember this, in Mortality Bound, right? Yeah, right. So that was definitely a Jim Butcher shout out on our part. And I got feedback that's like, what the hell's wrong with these people? They clearly don't know what a Mustang is.
I remember now, yeah.
Yeah. Hercules is you describe him as the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger could not fit in the back of a Mustang, right?
And they also, I gave it 4 doors, I think.
Yeah, or something like that. It's
Yeah, it was like, how many doors was in question?
Yeah. So these points of confusion, like we genuinely never bothered to look up what a Mustang looked like. We both at the time didn't own cars. I do now, but I didn't then. And yeah. So anyway, these points matter is I guess what my point is. So
That's exactly it. Yeah, those are bad questions. The coffee and the Mustang are both questions that pulled those readers. I pulled me out of the story with the coffee and the Mustang out of the story for that other reader.
yeah.
So that's a really great point. The last thing that I would note here is, with the choice I made to give Rosie a last name when we introduce her is meeting thriller expectations, right? The first time we meet Clarice, we see her as Clarice Starling, and it lends a certain thriller gravitas, like that this character will be fighting for their life. There's just, it's just a thriller thing.
Yeah. Actually, on that point, sorry to interrupt again, but we won't out him just in case he doesn't want to be out, but J.D. Kirk, right? So he's an indie author who switched genres from sci-fi to thriller, and he's 7 figures. And I don't know if you know who he is, but you've met him. We both met him. Anyway, when he was researching the thrillers, he literally, that point of the last name, first name, like it was something he brought up where he not only researched that expectation of a full name, but also the expectation of the kind of full name, right? And it kind of getting that, middle America, right? Like down to earth, right? Generic, that kind of thing. Like, these details do matter. So Mullins is a perfect last name.
That's actually something I thought of, but without really realizing I thought of it, is like, what's a generic middle America name that I could give her? That's so true.
It's very cool, yeah.
Okay, so if with your approval, I will move on. Are you happy?
Let's
go. Okay. So the next one is romance. So I decided to pick a romance that is really popular. This one has 43,000 reviews on Amazon that also got made into a movie. I picked one that is contemporary romance because the student submission is also contemporary. So this one's called The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. And the opening paragraph goes, I have a theory. Hating someone feels disturbingly similar to being in love with them. I've had a lot of time to compare love and hate, and these are my observations. And she goes into the observations. And the next paragraph is long, so I didn't include it. But this one, I think, really exemplifies a couple things, right? We have the 4 elements of a great opener that we've examined. Clearly, we have a very strong voice here, a POV, that first person, and it's really clear narration. But we also have like a very distinct romance voice. Romance first person voices tend to be like very sharp. They tend to be witty, incisive. They just carry you along because there's a lot of kind of monologuing that happens as they're describing their life. And so that is, I think, one of the most crucial elements in contemporary romance is getting that voice down really well, because typically that's going to be carrying you along through the novel. Of course, there's also the other parts of the romance formula, the plot, that's crucial as well, the happily ever after. But when it comes to this opener. Voice is so potent.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's also a voice that clearly demonstrates that love is a choice. Right, right. So because like contemporary romance in which the person can't like is forced to be in love, right? Like right, it's not like an active action to meeting the person and like the dating and all overcoming the obstacles and all that, but you're kind of in like that 1800s like damsel in distress kind of era is not. So this person clearly feels like someone who's in control. Like she's not going to just needlessly get swept away until she is, right? Until it's just overwhelmingly, this is what's going to happen, right? So
that's a great point there, because it draws on one of the biggest sources of tension in romance, which is they basically have to have a huge reason why they would never be with this person, and hating them is about as big a reason as it gets. So it's like readers will be wondering, how does one overcome this hate to be with someone? That's why enemies to lovers is so popular. So here's a student submission. This is also contemporary romance. She calls it spicy. So it's okay if I curse, I hope. If not, I won't.
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, so this is Victoria Benoit. I think that's how you pronounce her pen name. Chapter 1 starts with the male POV, Friedrich. Just a few passes around the room and then we'll go, okay? I turn to look up at the man next to me. I would generally be considered tall if not standing next to my best friend who towers over everyone in the room. He leans to the side slightly to hiss at me. This is your last night of freedom. We should be living it up, not crammed in some stuffy ballroom with these fucking vipers. Okay. So, clearly this person has a strong sense of the edginess of contemporary romance. She calls it spicy, right? And there is spice already in these first two paragraphs, particularly that last line there. One thing that I had trouble with is, personally, I couldn't tell who was speaking right away. I wasn't sure whose dialogue that was, if it was the main character or the best friend. And if I have trouble with something, I usually assume that other readers, some may have trouble with it too. Because I don't represent all readers, but I certainly represent some, I think. And so that's what makes dialogue very challenging as an opener. So what I did, this is just personally how I would strengthen it. So many books open with dialogue very successfully. This is my revision. What a nest of fucking vipers. I lean toward my best friend to whisper, just a few passes around the room and then we'll go, okay? Between the two of us, we tower over everyone here. He hisses at me. This is your last night of freedom. We should be living it up, not crammed in this stuffy ballroom with these powdered sycophants. All right, so why did I make these changes? First of all, in the original, the best friend was the sexiest guy in the room. The best friend was the one who delivered the fucking Vipers line. He was the tall one. And he got to deliver, like, he hissed, like he just got to do all the sexy stuff. And so in my revision, it's the main character who is the sexy one. He gets to deliver the Vipers line. He's just as tall as his best friend. And so now there's more focus on him and him being desirable to the reader, basically. Yeah. And then I added powdered sycophants as a replacement for vipers, but insert insult here. To remove any potential sources of confusion. The dialogue opener was a source of confusion for me that raised bad questions for me. So I removed that as a source of confusion. Yeah. 3, sharpen the voice. As I mentioned with that great Sally Thorne opener, a sharp, incisive first-person voice is really going to carry your book. And so you want to make sure that you really punch them with that voice. Like you get readers in the solar plexus, and then you just don't let go. So go ahead.
I have a question though. So, and I'm curious, actually, just this is like, I don't know I don't have an opinion or an answer to this, but when you say what a nest of, fucking vipers, why not an ellipses? Why a period?
I personally, okay, so I should say that like all my choices are choices that I would personally make. And the reason I would personally make that choice is I really like punchy first sentences, like short, declarative first sentences really have a lot of power to me. That's pretty much how I open all my books. And so that's my choice there.
Yeah,
You would add an ellipsis?
Yeah, I would. I mean, as you probably have seen in my books, right? Like I always like to give that sense of lingering thoughts, right? The
Yeah.
lingering thought, and so because I really like the way you changed it, and I like, for a lot of reasons, that first sentence and having the swear word in the first sentence is extremely jarring. I remember watching an interview with, oh my God, who, I think it was Tony Robbins actually. And so I never really watched anything of Tony Robbins or anything. But I had this vision of this guy, right? Like this guy, like what he was and what he did and stuff. And he gets on in this interview and he's swearing every 3 words, right? And I'm going, that's not what I had in my head this guy would be like, right? He's supposed to make people's lives better, but he's saying lots of potty words. Why is he saying the potty words? And I'm just very confused by this. And then in the interview, he actually said, like, addressed why he swears. And he goes, swearing is a great way to get someone's attention because it's often extremely unexpected. And not only is it unexpected, it's such an emotionally charged word that when you throw in that emotionally charged word, you're literally telling people to care.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Because it really was that like dissonance between what I was expecting him to sound like and then what he actually sounded like. It was very different. Anyway, so I love the first line for that reason, because you're forcing people to think about or to decide to care.
That's a great point. Go ahead, Jim.
I think we have one more genre after this, or is this the last genre?
One more.
Okay, cool. Let's do that, and then I want to have a couple minutes for some questions.
Okay.
More general fiction editing, and especially as a newbie nonfiction person.
All right, we'll go more quickly through this last one. Oh, I think I have a typo. Is that right, Andy? WEIR?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. No typo. We're good. Okay. The Martian. I know this is a favorite of Rami's. Okay, so it begins, I'm pretty much fucked. That's my considered opinion. Fucked. 6 days into what should be the greatest month of my life, and it's turned into a nightmare. So I have a lot of thoughts about why this is working well. For one, we have, we're utilizing that simple declarative opening line, and we're combining it with the potty mouth, as Rami called it. And it's not just a simple line, it's its own paragraph. In fact, all 4 first lines are their own paragraph, which really draws attention to itself, not just through that fact, but all the white space we're creating here. It creates this momentum, this interesting rhythm that we're getting. It's a monologue, essentially, similar to what we saw in romance. We have a very sharp voice. And I think that's so important for this novel, right? Because this is an astronaut who gets stranded on Mars, and he's all by himself. And so a lot of the novel is carried by his monologue. Him talking, he's not even sure if it's to anyone, it's just to himself, maybe. And so he has to have a great voice, but also we are made a very important choice here to make him funny. Someone who monologues and isn't funny is in a tragedy. And this is not a tragedy. This is, well, it's a comedy, but it has a lot of great tension and high stakes. Any thoughts here before I move on to the student submission?
No, not really. I love this book, and if you ever want to, like, if anyone's not read this book, it is amazing. So that's my only contribution.
Yeah, he does a really great job too, with the opener, especially, I would say. So this student submission is also in sci-fi, but this one is alien invasion. It's from a student who's writing under the pen name MJ Finn. His original submission goes, the planetary defense grid's alarms blared through the city's comm networks, filling the middle of the night with a sense of urgency overlaid with fear. A swarm of cryomech assault vehicles, swarm kites, had been detected streaking away from the enemy hivestone. The initial trajectory placed them landing on the planet's dark side within 3 hours. Okay, so this student clearly really knows his genre. He's quickly getting in all of this sci-fi language. The aliens are invading immediately, like in the first paragraph. And there's a wonderful sense of grounding and tension. Like it's as high as the tension can get. The problems are great. I do, though, have suggestions for how this could be stronger. Here's my revised opener. In the deep of the night, the planetary defense grid's alarms activated for the first time, blaring through the city's comm networks. A swarm of cryomech assault vehicles, swarm kites, had been detected, streaking away from the enemy hivestone. They would land on the planet's dark side within 3 hours. Okay, so why did I make these choices? One, I wanted to tighten the writing, especially that first line or the first paragraph. And why? Because that first line was doing too much on the nose work there, right? Like, so we got the what was it? It was like overlaid with fear and urgency. And that's implied, right? If we're hearing alarms at night, then there's urgency to that, and we're probably going to be fearful. So that's all implied, and we just took that out. And lastly, I wanted to up the ante with this. So I added the alarms activating for the first time. And in this way, we don't know how it's going to work. This may be the first invasion. I don't know if this is true for his opener. I just threw this in because I wanted to make this as high stakes as possible, even more so. So that was my student revision. And then I'll just move on to my recap of everything real quick so that it all comes home. So good writing is good writing is good writing. It's always true that great writing is going to be compelling. Remember those opener 4 elements that are powerful and help readers sink into your novel. They are POV intent, grounding, questions, and tension. Secondly, a different dimension here is knowing your genre and meeting reader expectations in your genre. So each genre that I covered, there were different reader expectations that I pointed out with those. So thrillers, it was physicality and violence. Romance, it was a strong voice. And the main character being the sexiest one in the room. And then sci-fi, it was having basically sci-fi language very quickly, immersion in that sort of language in that world. And that's it.
Yeah.
That's everything.
What's hilarious is MJ Finn is my student, and the other 2 students are probably with other, I mean, not probably, are most certainly with other coaches as well. So when you were kind of talking about MJ Finn's stuff, I went, oh yeah, I actually know I know what the whole story is about. I know everything.
Oh,
I helped to plot it out at one because when I have many like new students will always work on a plot line with me, and then he's not a new student though. He actually is someone who's kind of been with us for a while. But I know that he had called me about this particular book. It was like, can we talk this through? I was like, so yeah. Anyway,
awesome.
very cool.
That's awesome. This is great, Shavonne. Hey, if you want to unshare your screen, and then we can do our
Yes.
final kind of couple
Yes.
thoughts here.
Oh, sure.
And so guys, if you missed it, you can see a bunch of visuals that will probably make this make a lot more sense on the YouTube channel on the video version of the show. We're pretty much at time here, but maybe I'll ask one question, and then Rami, if you want to ask one question, then we'll wrap. I guess for me, Shavonne, I'm curious, first-time fiction authors, biggest mistakes that they make in the editing process, or just biggest things that is kind of like you don't know what you don't know that you would impart to people who are listening or watching?
I would say that the thing I see most often is people overwriting. That 90% of people tend to write too much, and then they can pull it back and make their writing a lot more powerful. Basically, with all three of those examples I showed, I pulled back and then the writing popped. So that is, I would say, the most common thing.
Nice.
And then I think if I were to ask a question like along those lines, it's like, so when the overwriting is kind of dealt with, what is the kind of mistake that you find like outside of the overwriting that just tends to reverberate throughout the story? Like where do young writers kind of, where does the story fall apart for them? Like where are the points of danger for a young writer, if that makes sense?
I would say the biggest point of danger, the thing that will make or break your story developmentally, and by that I mean your big picture stuff, is having a character who is passive or doesn't want anything. Like in the Clarice Starling Silence of the Lambs opener, she's on the move, like in the first paragraph. She's in a rush, even though she has grass all over her. And already she's dynamic, already she's intriguing. And a good rule of thumb is to give your character a goal in every scene. Whether it's big or small, have them moving towards something. And this is always going to make your writing more compelling and stronger. And it's when your characters don't want anything, when they're just passive, then the writing immediately becomes less interesting.
Thanks.
I love it. I know you guys could probably talk for hours and hours on fiction editing, and I know you talk about it a lot in the courses and stuff, Rami. And so I guess my last question for you, Siobhan, would be, where can people go to find out more about you, working with you, your editing, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I can be reached at my website, Motif, MOTIF edits.com, or you can email me directly, Shavonne at motifedits.com. Love
it. Well, guys, if you're interested in checking out more about what we do at selfpublishing.com, you can go to selfpublishing.com/fiction. You can book a call with the team there. They'd be happy to chat with you and walk you through, your goals for your book, challenges, how we might be able to help, all that good stuff. We also have a ton of fiction training, webinars, blog content, all that stuff from Rami on selfpublishing.com and on our other site, Self Publishing School. So if you're looking for good fiction training, feel free to check that out. Or book a call with the team at selfpublishing.com/fiction, and come back next week. We'll be diving into more fiction stuff as part of the Fiction Takeover. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Okay, see ya. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help the podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps of how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.